Welcome, everyone. I'm Sharon Prince, CEO and founder of Grace Farms Foundation, and I'm here today to introduce our Design for Freedom's International Guidance and Toolkit, released on December 10th, International Human Rights Day, as new members of the UN Global Compact and Alliance 8.7. At Grace Farms, our humanitarian work to end modern slavery and foster more grace and peace in our local and global communities includes leading the Design for Freedom movement to eliminate forced and child labor from the building materials supply chain. We bring people together across sectors to address some of the most pressing humanitarian issues of our time. Design for Freedom is creating a radical paradigm shift to design and build more humanely. The new International Guidance and Toolkit is a tool that can move us toward this goal. This comprehensive report builds upon both our historic 2020 Design for Freedom report and our 2022 Design for Freedom Toolkit, and aims to provide professionals with the research and tools they need to implement ethical and forced labor-free material sourcing strategies into their practices. The International Guidance and Toolkit explores the critical issues related to forced labor and proposes responses to address them, providing new expert perspectives on the industry through an international lens, and examines specific materials that are at high risk of forced and child labor. Forced labor in global supply chains is a global issue. By expanding our engagement in Europe and Asia, and issuing the International Guidance and Toolkit geared towards a growing global audience, we are better poised to address this egregious human rights violation. Through new public and private sector partnerships, we're accelerating a radical paradigm shift to design and build a more humane future for all. In this iteration, we provide new human rights due diligence tools that practitioners can use to advance ethical and transparent supply chains. A preview of the Guidance and Toolkit was prepared for the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association UK in September, prior to its full publication in support of its legislative strengthening seminar to address modern slavery in supply chains. We invited more than 24 global leaders and experts in their fields to provide their unique perspectives, some of whom you will hear from today, offering hands-on tactics to navigate the ethical sourcing of materials. These insights explore the legal landscape, the importance of compliance, the growing issue of prison labor, and the role insurers and investors can play to ensure that our building materials are not embedded with forced or child labor. These international leaders and experts have partnered with us on this work over time. Each section of this report, the guidance, at-risk material analysis of 12 raw and composite materials, and the enhanced tools section, make it possible for all stakeholders to take steps to better understand where forced labor risks may lie, build stronger and increasingly ethical and transparent supply chains, increase capacity within your own sphere of influence and beyond, decrease risks of businesses and projects, and be an active part of the movement to eliminate forced and child labor from the building material supply chain, creating a more humane and sustainable future. To achieve these goals, we have provided enhanced practical and actionable tools, including project team and supplier engagement letter to initialize conversations, ethical design requirements, specific and specifications to require ethical sourcing, self-assessment questionnaire to address known suppliers, and slavery and trafficking risk template, the STRT, to further investigate areas of risk, and finally, contract language to create a binding commitment, which is quite bold. The Guidance and Toolkit is grounded in the 3 principles of Design for Freedom. First, to find and address embedded forced labor. Second, pursue ethical decarbonization. And third, to prioritize circularity. When we first launched Design for Freedom in 2020 with a groundbreaking report and a dedicated website with resources, it was an ambitious goal to create a radical paradigm shift to remove forced and child labor from the building material the whole built environment. The $13.7 trillion construction sector is one of the most disaggregated and least modernized sectors. Its opacity enables the perpetuation of forced labor. Nearly 28 million people around the world are now held in forced labor conditions, an increase of 3 million people in the past 5 years, many of them extracting the very materials that go into our homes, schools, offices, and even landscapes. The construction industry is at a very high risk of forced and child labor. The sheer scope of the industry contributes to the opacity of the building material supply chain, but also provides a real opportunity to create a lasting and positive impact with a move towards ethically sourced materials. G20 countries, such as the United States, China, United Kingdom, and Germany, are importing more than $468 billion worth of products at risk of being produced with forced labor. The G20 countries are the wealthiest countries in the world and do have accountability. The United States is the top importer, valued at $169.6 billion worth of at-risk products, compared to Argentina, the lowest importer, bringing in $1.6 billion worth of goods at risk. Given the G20's level of influence in the global economy, it is critical to examine their efforts to address forced labor through economic and trade measures. 4 of the top 6 at-risk products are ubiquitous in the built environment. Think about it: electronics, solar panels, textiles, and timber. This clearly identifies interiors as low-hanging fruit to focus on ethical procurement of every chair, table, sofa, curtain, rug, and lighting system. Our first goal is to find and address this embedded forced labor. Prior to the launch of Design for Freedom 5 years ago, there wasn't a framework or blueprint then to understand how design and construction professionals could prioritize human rights and ethical procurement, let alone consider how the embedded suffering of forced labor is deeply interconnected with climate change. This is an updated list of 12 at-risk materials that we have identified. As you can see, they are materials that are the most common raw and composite materials within the built environment. Just consider one of these that are used throughout our buildings: timber. Timber is often illegally forested and processed with exploitive labor, accelerating deforestation, impacting biodiversity, and the Earth's ability to mitigate carbon dioxide, one of the primary greenhouse gases responsible for climate change, despite many laws and regulations aimed at ending this illegal practice. We're adding mega cities the size of Paris and New York every month, according to the Building Materials and Climate Constructing a New Future. It's a report by the UNEP and the Yale Center for Ecosystems and Architecture. In 2022, buildings accounted for 34% of global energy demand and 37% of energy and process-related carbon dioxide emissions. Rubber is also a material that is at high risk of forced and child labor. For well over a century, it has been fraught. New research by Veris Maplecroft reveals the interrelationship between forced labor, climate hazards and vulnerability, corruption, and poverty that can be used to assess risk. In this guidance and toolkit, there are several analyses of materials specific to the built environment, which are useful to consider. We also provide a list of relevant certifications for many materials, including rubber, to help source rubber more sustainably and ethically. The extraction of materials like rubber from rubber trees can impact the climate crisis. We can address this by pursuing ethical decarbonization, by advancing climate goals that focus on the planet and its people. Ethical decarbonization is a new term that the Yale Center for Ecosystems and Architecture and Grace Farms are using that recognizes the link between the climate crisis and embedded forced labor in our building materials. It is a subset of the just transition and narrows the focus to ensure that decarbonization means and methods are made with fair labor. We can also build more sustainably and ethically by prioritizing circularity. By truncating the supply chain, we reduce the risk of forced and child labor embedded in our building materials. Since launching Design for Freedom, we've been joined by over 100 experts and leaders in the built environment, from architects and engineers, academics, scholars, suppliers, construction firms, human rights experts, lawyers, developers, owners, government agencies, and investors. Our partners include the range of stakeholders, including the United States U.S. Department of Overseas Building Operations, OBO, ASSA ABLOY, ARUP, the Institute for Human Rights and Business, Turner Construction, and many more. Before I introduce some of the people who contributed to the Guidance and Toolkit, let me take a moment and explain the importance of architecture and how it can drive humanitarian outcomes. We all have agency to use the built environment as a driver for global change. I've seen firsthand this happen at Grace Farms. As a cultural and humanitarian center, a new kind of boundary-defying space, we bring together some of the most exceptional leaders, from renowned artists to Pulitzer Prize and Nobel Prize winners, to confront and act upon social injustices in an open, publicly accessible place. The space we created at Grace Farms is peaceful yet active and has become a catalyst for good. The river buildings, surrounded by nearly 80 acres of natural preserved landscapes, provides a hopeful space to address difficult humanitarian issues and opens our minds to the possibilities. There are spaces in the world that can divide us, and spaces that do have the capacity to move us toward each other. Through our interdisciplinary perspective on nature, the arts, justice, community, and faith, we put the best minds in proximity to each other. It is in this space where we invite a cross-section of individuals, nonprofits, corporations, and civil society to collaborate for the common good. The result, unprecedented outcomes, well beyond what we could imagine. And one such new outcome is the upcoming March 2025 Design for Freedom Summit. We're going to be convening hundreds of leaders to initialize institutional responses to unethical and unscrutinized supply chains. For those who attend the summit, and in fact, for all of those who come to Grace Farms every day, that's 6 days a week, open free to the public, you will see a first of its kind exhibit about Design for Freedom with every fiber. The exhibit is in some ways a three-dimensional manifestation of the International Guidance and Toolkit, highlighting material tracking and an overview of bio-based materials that are both sustainable and ethical. It is designed by the incredible architect Nina Cook-John. She also designed the Harriet Tubman Monument in Newark, New Jersey. It includes a bio-wall installation by Anna Dyson from the Yale Center for Ecosystems and Architecture as well on the right. With every fiber, much like Design for Freedom pilot projects, it was designed and built with Design for Freedom principles in mind. Has to, of course. So the supply chain mapping tools can be helpful to increase transparency and illuminate the flow of products and materials. If sourcing documentation is not readily available, you can refer to the supply chain risk assessment platforms and technology programs listed here. We are so honored to have the Right Honorable, the Baroness Young of Hornsey, open the International Guidance and Toolkit with her thoughts on the Design for Freedom movement. I was pleased to have been with her and Elaine in September at Westminster when we provided a preview of this guidance and toolkit at 60 with 60 global parliamentarians. I'd like to announce that she will also be joining us at the Design for Freedom Summit on March 27th. Baroness Young is a driving force behind the UK Modern Slavery Act of 2015 and has clearly expressed her support for Design for Freedom. She thoughtfully wrote in the introduction of the new toolkit, "There is real momentum and desire behind the drive for change in the ways in which supply chains operate across the globe. Legislation is helping to focus minds on the subject, but we also need practical advice and informed support. The creation of Design for Freedom's International Guidance and Toolkit is part of that forward movement, responding as it does to the challenge of engaging the construction sector in meaningful dialogue, which will contribute to helping the move away from these abhorrent practices.
Until 2009, I was unaware that forced labour and domestic servitude could not be prosecuted under UK criminal law. That was a revelation not only to me, but to other parliamentarians. While I was pleased to be able to contribute to an important piece of legislation that changed that anomaly, it gave me no pleasure to think that the practices highlighted by Anti-Slavery International were not only occurring in domestic contexts, they were widespread. I soon discovered a whole new sphere of gross injustices, abuses perpetrated in every business sector and industry globally. From talking, reading, attending conferences, examining legislation, and most importantly, hearing from people with lived experience, I began to realize the magnitude of the task of trying to eliminate the abusive and exploitative labor systems commonly deployed by so many commercial companies. Recently, I've been encouraged by conversations with business leaders regarding the changes needed in supply chain management and accountability. Major players in the UK and in Europe support better, more comprehensive laws to call business to account. Striving for environmental sustainability and what that means in terms of auditing, measuring, and reporting has become the norm amongst corporations of all sizes. Sadly, the approach to eliminating forced labour often seems to lag behind in terms of business priorities. That must change. As a parliamentarian, I believe that legislation has a major part to play in making these changes happen, and I will continue to push for more robust laws that transform the way in which business is conducted in both the commercial and the public sectors. In the construction and building materials industry, there is now no place to hide. Ignorance has never been a valid defense in law, and we now have more awareness of what is going on in supply chains. So no excuses, please. I'm confident that by working in partnership with colleagues, we will contribute to driving beneficial changes in the way building materials are sourced. The Design for Freedom International Guidance and Toolkit will, I'm sure, prove a valuable aid in effecting transformation. Ultimately, though, responsibility lies with the decision makers at every level in the industry, and that means you.
Well, there is no place to hide, right? Many of you watching this webinar have been part of the acceleration to transform and remove forced and child labor from the built environment. The construction industry, one of the largest industrialized sectors at risk of forced labor, has been given a slavery discount or labor transparency pass for decades. We are working to change that. This work requires all of us to play our part. And as you can see here from this chart, you'll see these words in bold. These are the pressure points that we can all apply to demand accountability and take shared responsibility for ensuring our building materials are made without forced labor. You'll also find added rigor and alignment with existing global frameworks, such as the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, guidelines for multinational enterprises to address this slavery or exploitation discount. We have harnessed the knowledge and insight with our partners and team to advance a non-negotiable challenge that every building should be designed and built for freedom. We can take this knowledge with us forward today and recognize that we all have agency to design for freedom. I would now like to invite our Design for Freedom International lead, Elaine Mitchel-Hill, human rights and stone supply chain expert, to speak about the international components of the guidance and toolkit. Elaine is spearheading a drive with key partners in the UK, India, and beyond to expand the focus of addressing forced and child labor in the built environment to include that which is embedded in the building materials supply chain. Elaine?
I hope you're as excited as I am to see our international drive to eliminate forced and child labour so clearly reflected in the title of our international guidance and toolkit. It's much needed and has been very well received by our international partners. I'm sure that you'd agree that the contributions from our wide range of experts add weight and highlight the real need for collective action. Building on the momentum created by our team, together with our wide range of partners, many of whom are online with us now, we've been able to quickly and effectively scale up our international presence. I hope you'll be excited to learn that in the last 6 months, we've established Design for Freedom accelerators in both the UK and in India. So what does that mean? It means that this is where the work is taking place to action and bring to life our 3 principles: to find and address forced labour, pursue ethical decarbonisation, and prioritise circularity. And in the UK, our energies are focused on supporting the establishment of an all-party parliamentary group on just transition in the construction industry. So what does this lead to, you may be asking? Well, this will spark much-needed dialogue with a wide range of critical stakeholders and promote speedier collaboration and action in support of human rights in supply chains. You may also be wondering what's happening in India. Well, here, work is well underway with our strategic partner, Centre for Responsible Business, who has expertly guided us through a series of stakeholder meetings and consultations in readiness for the action that will now follow. In India, we're focused on elevating dialogue within the construction sector, influencing supply chain policy, and building a dynamic network of young leaders who will drive positive change. I'm absolutely delighted to announce today that Centre for Responsible Business has agreed to open up 4 intern opportunities as part of the India Accelerator. CEO Rijit Sengupta and the Centre for Responsible Business team, we thank you for your commitment and for taking such direct action and leadership in support of Design for Freedom's mission. I'm sure that you'd agree that the internships are a welcome dimension to our India programme. What I have to share here is crucial for change and impact. Our international focus for 2025 is scale. And our mantra is scale is magic, because getting to scale is when the magic happens. Momentum kicks in and we progress at speed towards our mission. You are a fundamental part of Design for Freedom's journey towards achieving the scale, the action and the pace that are so badly needed. The full eradication of forced labour by 2030 is the explicit target of SDG 8.7. But the number of people in forced labour is growing, not shrinking. So you might be thinking, how can I change that? Well, here's the news. Forced and child labour are man-made problems. I'm sure then that if I could see you now, you'd be nodding your head in agreement that if they're man-made problems, then there must be man-made solutions. So now here's the great news. Design for Freedom started 2025 as it means to go on. We announced our partnership with the UN Global Compact at the beginning of January. Being part of the world's largest sustainability platform with 82 in-country networks and actively engaging will help us scale up our efforts. We're also set to announce that we've been accepted by Alliance 8.7 as a partner organisation. So what does this mean? It means that we're joining forces with over 400 leading global organisations, all focused on scaling up solutions and driving innovation to eradicate forced labour, modern slavery, human trafficking, and child labour. I'm sure you'd agree that this is a major positive step forward. So where do we go from here? The next date for your diary is the Design for Freedom Summit on the 27th of March. We would love you to join us. During the summit, we'll announce further accelerator programmes working in support of and in collaboration with leading organisations addressing forced and child labour. So what does all of this mean for you? Well, we'll be reaching out to you to ask you to engage with us on these impactful platforms and programmes to play your part in scaling up action. Before I finish, I want to ask you to hold space with me for a moment, to think about children, both near and far, forced to work in the most hazardous forms of child labour. And while you're picturing this, consider how you would feel if this was a child known to you, a grandchild, a niece, a nephew, a son, or a daughter. The International Labour Organization defines hazardous child labour as work that is likely to harm the health or safety or morals of children. And this includes work that exposes children to dangerous environments, harmful substances, or physically demanding tasks. Some of the most hazardous forms of child labour identified include those in the construction sector, in the manufacturing of products, in the mining of minerals and materials, in agriculture. In short, those sectors producing products and materials for the construction sector, for you and for me and for our industry. These hazardous forms of child labour often lead to serious injuries, illness, and long-term psychological damage. I've spent much of my time in supply chains around the globe for the past 20 years, back to raw materials, back to often where the informal sector is enmeshed with the formal one, where no buyers visit, where no audits are undertaken, and where the laws enshrined to protect are not implemented. I've seen the harsh realities and know that many precious children working in the worst forms of child labour may never ever fully recover from the mental trauma and physical injuries they have suffered. I'm sure you'd agree that if you knew these children, you would find it abhorrent. And so it is equally abhorrent for the children who are part of our global community. We must all surely agree that no child should be made to suffer like this. I recently had the privilege to meet with migrant communities in Jodhpur, working in the quarrying of stone and labouring in construction. I met with 4 female members of the same family on a construction site, lugging stone. You can see them in the previous slide, dressed in their saris of yellow, pink and green, heads covered. Their slight frames were a sharp contrast to the size and weight of the stones that they carried. The youngest, a child, was 14. She'd been working since she was 10 years old. The oldest, her grandmother, was in her late 60s, and her mother and auntie were also there. This was a crystal clear demonstration of the generational cycle which persists when it was near impossible for people to overcome the systems in which they're trapped. Their gracious smiles and our brief conversation was revealing. The work was harsh, hazardous, they were paid less than their male counterparts, and the physical difficulty was compounded by the heat, and the exhaustion was clear to see. In sharp contrast, I met with the young children left behind at the roadside encampment, their home, while their parents had gone to labour from early hours until late into the evening, just to make enough money to scratch a living by the roadside. These children were vibrant, brimming with potential, and yet sadly are very unlikely to realise it unless we all push harder for change. Perhaps you'd agree that we often think in a highly sanitised way of migrant workers as transient, moving to and fro to follow work. But often the harsh reality is that they live on the margins of society with no rights and unable to improve their own situation. These children had been born at the roadside, living in a migrant community which has been there for 15 years. All were under the age of 8 or 9 years old. Life by the roadside is all that they have known, and they too, in a short space of time, are highly likely to end up working in quarrying and construction, forever trapped in a vicious cycle. So what can you do? What action can you take? There absolutely is something that each of us can do as we collectively act to end slavery. Design for Freedom's International Guidance and Toolkit is your place to start. If you haven't already, please download it now. The link is in the chat. I ask you to consider what it is that you can do and to take action. Actions, both large and small, will move us in the right direction. We each have a responsibility to be the change that we want to see. And we thank you in advance for engaging and bringing your energy in support of Design for Freedom's mission, the elimination of forced and child labour from the building materials supply chain. As Sharon shared earlier, the Guidance and Toolkit contains an analysis of 12 materials at high risk of forced and child labour. In his written contribution, John Morris, CEO of the Institute for Human Rights and Business, outlines how the shift to renewable energy will require significantly more of the copper, silicon, and rare earth metals used for power generation and transmission. And you'll hear from John now. He's just back from Davos, and he shares his views on the need for more and better global data on forced labour and his support for Design for Freedom.
Hi, I'm John Morrison. I'm the CEO of the Institute for Human Rights and Business, and I'm here today to support the launch of the Design for Freedom Guidance and Toolkit. Just coming back from Davos last week, we launched the Global Data Partnership Against Forced Labour. It is unacceptable that there are 28 million people around the world still in forced labour, more than at any other time in human history. It's true that forced labour isn't always as lethal now as it used to be, but it very much fits the definition in the ILO Convention all the way back from 1930. And these are 28 million people trapped in conditions of exploitation premised on the abuse of their human rights. They are very much commoditized in our global economy. I'm excited that this year we're beginning to get the data together from corporate supply chains, but also from trade unions, from workers, from governments, etc. And if we can bring that data together, we can show the patterns of where forced labor exists in our supply chains, and perhaps for the first time in human history, an irrefutable case for the abolition of forced labor. There's much work ahead, but the toolkit, Design for Freedom, fills a very important space in that puzzle. The construction sector, I would say, is one of the most neglected of all business sectors when it comes to these issues. And I guess most of the work all of us have done has been on construction itself, the condition of workers, if you think about World Cup sites, etc. Much, much less on the supply chain of the built environment. Just think about all the commodities, the materials that are drawn from every corner of the planet to build the houses, the infrastructure that our countries need. Nobody is really asking the questions of how workers and others are treated in those supply chains. If there's due diligence done, it's largely environmental around carbon, and that's really important. But we now need to step forward with social questions, due diligence, and in particular, the flags that might indicate forced labour risk in the supply chain. And this is where Design for Freedom comes in. The Institute for Human Rights and Business is proud to be a partner in the work, and we will be there for all of you as we go forward. But congratulations to Sharon, Elaine, and the whole team on this work. And we very much hope that all the businesses listening will take this as seriously as it deserves to be taken. So good luck and congratulations on the launch, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.
Some views of those with lived experience is vital, and we are fortunate indeed to have within our guidance a contribution from Amar. Amar is a child rights lawyer in India and a former child labourer in the sandstone sector, rescued at the age of 8 years old. We should pay special attention to his words and take inspiration from the path that he has forged. Being able to have an education and to study means that he is able to use his unique experience to fight and advocate for children. To me, he is an inspiration, a brilliant human being who is using his talents and skills to uplift others. He is a leader in this space and a leader within his own community. We'll hear from him now.
Welcome from my side, from this beautiful city, Stone City, Jodhpur. I am currently sitting here at the construction site where is the stone work is going on. And we know that Design for Freedom mission is actually for eradicating the child labor and forced labor from the stone sector and from the all the supply chain work. And the place from where I am sitting, and you know that Jodhpur is the hub of the stones, and there are millions of the children and thousands of the families who are involved in such kind of work at this place. And I really wanted to introduce you about this place, how people are struggling, what kind of the work they are doing here. People are working from generation to generations. And I am really looking forward to work with you. The mission which you have and the mission which I have, that the end of goal, that we make ensure that there is no child labor, there is no children working, not even any sector, and mostly Jodhpur in the stone quarry. That's what you want and I want. And I really want to thank you for the same again to you, that you gave me this opportunity to speak from your channel. And I'm looking forward to see you in the Design for Freedom Summit, which is having in the March, and looking for working together. And thank you so much again from my side, from my family, and this beautiful city, Jodhpur. Namaste.
Oh my goodness. I am so eager to meet Amar in person. Elaine, you were with him at this point. Siddharth Joshi, who is the photographer and who I've traveled with in India and elsewhere, is the one who shot that film just a few months ago. We are so fortunate to have leaders, all three of these leaders, not only contribute to our guidance and toolkit, but to be advocates and to be a part of our summit coming up. So I hope you do come and meet them. I have also been to Jodhpur, the Blue City, which is so beautiful, and have seen the stones that line for miles along the road. The community does know what's happening there, and we just are ignoring it. So the stone sector, you might also say, in India doesn't end up in the United States. It actually does. So with this, I am just so thrilled and delighted that they are able to come there for their contributions, for many, many others that I hope you will read and really understand your agency, right? As you use this, guidance and toolkit. I do ask you to also consider what is it that you can do and to take action. And we must be that change we want to see.
Thank you, Sharon. Yes, as Sharon mentioned, the Guidance and Toolkit is a practical and actionable resource for all of you to use to create more transparency in your work and to source ethically. And we really encourage all of you to use it in your daily practice, share it with your teams and partners. It's an incredible resource, and we are delighted to be able to offer it to the larger community. I'm now going to open it up to some Q&A. So if you have additional questions based on the presentation that you just saw, please do drop those into the Q&A box, and we'll be answering those live. I'm going to start with Karen, who is, can we advance actually to the next slide just to show who we have available with us for Q&A today? Here we go. So we have Bridget Abraham, who is our Design for Freedom Senior Project Manager, Elizabeth Rapwano, our Chief Communications Officer, and Karen Kariuki, our University Engagement and ACSA. And I'm Nora Rizzo, Ethical Materials Director. We are your Design for Freedom team, working very diligently on the toolkit and a lot of projects. Karen, I'm going to start with you. This question we get all the time, and is highly relevant, but we get this question from young folks a lot, and they're always asking us, how can students get more engaged? How do emerging professionals dive into this work? We know that they've got a passion for this, and so this question pops up all the time.
Yes, thank you, Nora, for the question. Design for Freedom has a deep commitment to preparing the next generation of leaders and learners and thinkers. We know that the next generation is really looking at issues around sustainability and ethical sourcing and supply chain in more holistic ways than ever before. And we believe that our engagement with university students, with universities in general, and with professors is critical to the success of this effort. We've been doing this in various ways, all of which are really exciting. Some of these efforts are more nascent and some of them are more established. But I would encourage you to look on our Design for Freedom website. We actually have a dedicated university page that lays out many of the opportunities, both of what has happened in the past and how we're looking to engage in the future. Very tactically, we are very delighted to announce that this academic year, we have a competition with an organization called ACSA, the Association of Colleges and Schools of Architecture. This is a global membership organization, and together we have launched a competition to embed and integrate Design for Freedom into the studio and into the classroom. And through that competition, there are two different strands. One is a design competition itself, and another is on materials research. That is open now. We encourage you to spread the word about that and also get your students and any studios or universities that are near you or work with any of you involved in that. So we will be working on that, and I am open to any questions about that competition. I would also say that while Design for Freedom is an effort around architecture, construction, and engineering, it will take all efforts within across sectors. Meaning we are engaging with business schools, with law schools, with schools of public policy, with schools of economics, supply chain, both undergrad and graduate level. So I would just encourage you to think expansively. We are working with Stanford University currently in their civil engineering department, looking at materials tracing. We've worked with the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth on a strategy consulting project. So I'm saying all of this to say that the opportunities are endless, and we are both cultivating those opportunities and looking for you to come to us with those as well.
That's great. Thank you so much, Karen. It's really encouraging to see how excited the next generation of designers and folks in this space are. It's just been incredible to see their passion throughout their work so far. Bridget, I have a question for you. This is something that we love to work on projects. You're an architect. One of the things that we are doing as a Design for Freedom team is kind of actualizing the toolkit and bringing this work to light so that it is not just another report out there in the world, but it really is a guide on how to do this work. We have a program, pilot projects program that we work on. So can you just talk a little bit more about the pilot projects themselves, just the program, and how folks can get involved in that?
Okay, great. Thank you, Nora. So we do have a select number of pilot projects. We take on, a distinctive amount every year, and that shows certain projects that are mission aligned with our work at Design for Freedom. And you can learn more about, we have actually on our website some of our case studies of some of our completed works. Our pilot project program is now in its fourth year, which is very exciting. And we announce a new slate of pilot projects at the Design for Freedom Summit. So looking forward to those who can join us and hear more about our pilot project program. And we've worked with projects such as the Serpentine Pavilion in 2022 to a tiny Big Fork library out in Big Fork, Montana. So always trying to show new typologies, new types of projects, and how Design for Freedom and add value to the mission of the work that's being done. And really, we can learn more every year. So really, our work compounds on each other with each project that we do.
That's great. Thank you. We do have another question about how firms can best implement ethical standards for materials and products into their specs. The good news is we have a sample specification that is included in the toolkit. So in our first iteration of the toolkit, we had a Division 1 spec that folks could use. And now we've expanded on that, updated it with some of the great resources that have come out in the last couple of years. And then we've also got a sample wood spec in there, for instance, so that we know a lot of times subcontractors and contractors don't often read sections that are outside of their responsibility. So we want to make sure that we are including the specifications in Division 1, but also layering it into individual spec sections as well, so that everyone is aware that this is a priority for a project. So that's downloadable on our website as a separate document as well. So it's there. Feel free to use it. We encourage feedback on it and would love to know how you're incorporating it into your work. Sharon, I have a question for you that has come up. So a lot of connection between the apparel industry, the food and agriculture industry, and kind of how we started to see transparency there in the earlier days of supply chain mapping. How is that work related to what you've done with Design for Freedom and the building materials supply chain, and what can we expect to see going forward?
That the textile industry is actually at high risk. If you look at those top 6 products that are at the highest risk, garments is separate from textiles. And so what hasn't happened is the scrutiny that has been applied to the garment sector, fast fashion, has not transferred yet to textiles. And it's literally, that's what I was just trying for, the low-hanging fruit to be able for us to do this. There's already, you'll see in our toolkit, many more textile relevant certifications that include third-party audited labor for fair labor. So I think that this is a tremendous opportunity. And it's also the way for everyone to, I mean, we may not build an entire building. Grace Farm is the first building I ever built. But you will buy most often you're fortunate enough to buy a chair, a curtain, and all those, opportunities where textiles can start to ask those questions. Where does our chair come from? There's less materials than, let's say, a HVAC system. So we're very keen to really activate that sector. And we've early on had contributions with Miller Knoll, Debbie Probst, who's been a very active part of our working group, and many more. So this is an opportunity for really everyone to ask for their own personal, professional, and particularly for interior designers to start to activate the textile sector for interiors. Mm-hmm.
That's great. Thank you. Another question we get a lot is around certifications. So Design for Freedom itself is not an industry certification. We are a convener, a collaborator, a resource for the industry, and certainly partner with many of the leading industry associations. So we work very closely with the USGBC, Living Future, the International Well Building Institute, the AIA, Mindful Materials, and many of those associations are part of our Design for Freedom working group. So these industry leaders have made a commitment to advancing social health and equity throughout the built environment. And we work very actively with them on technology, supply chain mapping, advocacy partnerships to make sure that we're all kind of working collaboratively in this space. We know that this is a huge global crisis, and there is no way we're getting to where we want to be if we're working individually. So the industry has just been absolutely incredible in coming together and recognizing that we all do need to be working together to make sure that we see the progress that we want to see in this space.
Could I also add something to that, Laura? So I think that what the uniqueness of Design for Freedom as a movement is it's coming from within the industry, right? So this is what's so exceptional about it, and that so many competitors are at the same table looking and examining ways to create transparency together. So it's not only all the various organizations that you're working with that are leading the industry more sustainably are adding these fair labor inputs to ethically also direct the transparency towards fair labor. It's pretty remarkable. And we've had such a great so many great relationships with all the organizations you just described. It's also the same with all of those, not only in the working group, with all of you on this call. It's that's the most promising part, I think, about how we're going to be able to accelerate the movement together.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had a follow-up question to the textile question. Do some of the same certifications for ethical garments apply to textiles? Absolutely, they do. There is a lot of overlap between the textile garment industry and the textiles that go into the buildings that we're all working on. So yes, there's a lot of overlap in those certifications, which is great that we have access to some of those. And as Sharon mentioned, we see more certifications in that space because we're building off of the great work that's already been done in that industry, while still recognizing they have a lot of work to do as well. We have another question here on, does forced and child labor occur in the United States? I'm happy to take that one, or if, okay. So we do. We have over a million people working under forced labor conditions here in the United States. And it is something that maybe we think about not being a pervasive problem here in the US, but it is certainly happening. Unfortunately, it has increased in the last few years because of migrant populations, because of exploitation of child laborers and unaccompanied minors coming into the States. We know that we are in a very trying political time right now, so we'll see if things start to improve. But there is definitely a population in the United States that is working under these conditions that were discussed today. So, Bridget, I'm going to throw a question back over to you. Do you have materials to help me talk to my client and consultant team about forced labor?
Absolutely. So this was mentioned, Sharon had mentioned previously in the presentation. We do have at the beginning this supplier and project team engagement letter. That's a great place to start. So when you look on our website at the International Guidance and Toolkit, scroll down and you'll see a list further down about all of the tools broken out. So definitely would start if you're speaking to your clients or consultants with that engagement letter. It's a great opportunity to get that dialogue started. And then in addition to that, we also have some contract language available. And also the best thing you can really do is arm yourself with information. So I would also take a really good look at the beginning of the guidance section of our toolkit and look at one material and really familiarize yourself with maybe I really just want to know more about timber, or as we showed rubber today, and really take that with you as you start to have these conversations, and you'll see how people respond to it, and it'll proliferate from there. So that's really the best way to start, but certainly getting into all of those tools are set up in that way to really get you all started.
Great. Another question, does this report address which materials are most at risk for forced labor practices in the US? I imagine furniture is one of high concern. So in our toolkit, we do not break out by country, specifically the US products that are made here. But what we do is have global hotspot maps for each of the high-risk materials that Sharon mentioned. So you can see globally where maybe there are areas of concern, maybe where a little bit more due diligence needs to happen if you are sourcing a particular material from a particular global hotspot. We do know furniture is a high concern here in the US because of prison labor. A lot of furniture that goes into federally and state-funded projects does have a requirement that a minimum amount needs to be made with prison labor, which is quite shocking. We have a prison labor write-up within the toolkit that kind of just really introduces you to the issue here, specifically to the US. And we are also working with a subcommittee on advancing that prison labor work here in the US, and we'll have a fuller report out to the industry later this year. We have another question here, which I will throw to either Elaine or Sharon who wants to jump in here. Have you considered doing an audit of a well-known project not built with these things in mind to calculate an estimate of how many hours of at-risk labor or how many at-risk laborers might have been involved in this material sourcing? Perhaps there is a well-known firm or owner that would offer this up in order to raise awareness and show an example.
I'll take this because we actually have worked on this with Chris Sharples and his team, so technically oriented too, and innovative, and thinking through how to add their wherewithal. And we paired them with Fair Supply out of Australia because they actually have more construction data to fuel their platform, their tech platform. So they've been working on really being able to give an example of a project, the specs that go into that, and what it would take to then deliver and understand how many, the risk factors and how many actual people would be at risk to produce that building. So this is in situ right now. This is part of the work they're doing together, and that's pretty revealing, right? And so far there has been nothing that suggests there's nobody who would be subsidizing a project. And Elaine, did you have something else you wanted to add to that?
I've seen the question actually, and I was just pondering on it. And I think as much as a retrospective audit, can be useful, I think my lens is very much on how do you take some of the tools that we're sharing in the toolkit, or how do you work within an organization to help your procurement department understand the impact of what's being purchased? So where you're looking to build, is kind of doing that piece of work as the due diligence, as part of the process now of building. And I think it's not only about audit, it's actually about monitoring, effectively monitoring as the project continues to understand. And I think the really important thing, and what I would particularly like to see, are organizations starting to do that, but then bringing some of those really challenging things that they might have found that were a surprise to them, or things that have been identified as part of that process. So I guess rather than that retrospective, have you audited, and I think kind of, if you like, shaming the organization that's built the building, I think it's much more about looking forward and being brave enough to share some of the challenges that you've found. And we can figure out together, perhaps as an industry or in working groups, what it is that we might need to do collectively, because it's no one single organization or person's problem. So for my part, that was what that question got me thinking about. So thank you for the question.
Great. And we have this comment, reminds me of LCAs from a human and cost perspective. Absolutely. I think that that is 100% true. And I think in an ideal world, we'd love to see kind of this factored into all those decisions that are being made from a sustainability perspective, a carbon perspective, and making sure that people are making holistic choices, and always looking for best practices as they're sourcing materials. We have another note about, go ahead.
I just want to add one more thing. We did want to, early on in 2020, our report, you'll see that we did do a forensic study on our own roof. You'll see that. So it was very helpful, though, to start to ask the questions of our suppliers, and also to determine how far back we go to understand. You'll see that in our report. How many tiers back could we go? And we found out that a couple of important things. One is that they've never, Zaner was willing to give the information. Usually they say it's like our secret sauce. They said this is a human crisis, humanitarian crisis. And they, once they understood the issue, they were very willing to work with us. And they also know that no one's asked them before, very willing. If you'd asked us before the project, we would be able to direct, first, there's two things: to direct towards ethically sourced materials, to ask the questions, but also we talk about remediation too. Like that's a whole nother area of how to use the muscle of a project to ensure that the workers are paid, right? So that's another area to talk about. The second thing that we learned is that that not only where they never asked, they said if we did ask them, they would have had more information. But we also learned that only 5 or so materials on our roof was a difficult process, right? So that you have to think, to go back even with a nail, right? So asking those questions early on is the primary forensic epiphany we had. Mm-hmm.
All right, we are wrapping. We did have one more question about sharing this webinar. It is being recorded. It will be included as an on-demand video resource on our website. So we encourage all of you to share this with your team and partners who maybe weren't able to join us today. We do see so many of our great partners on this call today, and we want to thank you for your partnership in working to design and build a more humane future for all. And we encourage you to come visit us at Grace Farms, and hope to see you soon. Thank you all.